This meeting of the Addison Central School District to order today, Monday, November 28th. We're here on Charles Ave. And why don't we start with, actually, do we have any? We'll start with introductions and then we'll give the participants who are here on Zoom. Why don't we start with you, Will?
Will Hatch, Technology Director.
Steve Orzek.
Mary Gill.
Lindsay Hescock.
Barb Wolf.
Jamie McCallum.
Peter Conlon.
Jen Newseeder.
Victoria Jetty.
Peter Burrows, Superintendent.
Ryan Bauer.
Chip Malcolm.
Mary Heather Noble.
Joanna Doria.
And we do have no board members joining us on Zoom at the moment. If you could just read the attendees, that would be great.
Sure. Amy Clapp, Emily Blistein, MCTV, Michelle, Nancy Crawford, Tim O'Leary.
Great, thank you very much. All right, at this time, as always, we welcome public comment. If you're here in the room for public comment, we'll start with you and then look to those on Zoom. So please raise your Zoom hand at the appropriate moment and we'll get to you. Someone here?
Hi everyone, Tanya Scuteri. I see the facilities bond issue is on the agenda tonight, so I just wanted to speak to that. I guess I would ask that besides evaluating and prioritizing the different recommendations, that we really scrutinize them. And at the risk of sounding like a broken record, I'll just repeat again, when this original study had come out in the elementary schools and some community members looked at Shoreham specifically, there were a couple of items that were really big red flags, two of which were the lighting and the paving. And so the lighting at the time was, I think, 6 years old, designed by Efficiency Vermont. The report said that there were 16-foot candles, or however that's evaluated, that they felt was not adequate. And I just looked around online and said, well, what is recommended? It looks like it's 10 to 20 for a classroom setting. And I've spent time in, I think, every room in that building and haven't observed any inadequate lighting. So I just hope that we really scrutinize these recommendations in addition to evaluating them. The other item was paving for Shoreham, which the district doesn't own. And while it is in not perfect condition, somebody who does professional estimating for an excavating company looked at it and said, it needs some patching, but it's years from needing resurfacing. And with some simple patching, you could get another 10 years out of it. And it's probably 20 years from needing like a full resurfacing as the report recommended. So that represented 40% of the expenses for Shoreham. So that's a pretty significant amount. So as we look district-wide, I just hope we really scrutinize all of these recommendations and make sure that they really make sense and that they're really needed. And we have such limited dollars, we have to be really careful how we spend them. So thank you.
Thank you. Yes. State your name.
Jim Seeger. So similarly to the facilities issue, and I have a background in facilities, used to do some commercial building. I worked in one form of facilities or another all my life, currently work at the college in facilities. I can't speak specifically to everything. I have not gone through the entire budget. I have spoken to Bruce a couple times about some matters of how the estimate was prepared. I did look closely at Ripton for a little while back because I live in Ripton. I looked at physically at the building and some of the things were pointed out. I'm not going to name specific issues, simply to agree with what I just heard said, perfect word, scrutinize. There are many, many issues that were done with a very, very big brush, very broad stroke. You know, lighting issues, paving issues, signage issues, things of that, and just many updates that, do we really need that? Is it really that much? And I just think that it would probably, for the type of money we're talking about, it would probably behoove the board to hire a consultant to go through again each building with a fine-tooth comb and really tightly estimate, does this really need, it might get worse in the end of the day with today's construction rates, but does this really need to be done? And is it really that much to do it? I don't think Bruce would probably disagree with me. I don't think he has anything to gain in this. So I just to go through this with a much finer tooth comb before we talk about bonding and spending tens or hundreds of millions of dollars. Does it really need doing, and is it really that much? That's all I'm saying. Is it premature to decide how we're going to bond this? Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in the room? And on Zoom, I can't see.
Michelle.
Michelle, thank you.
Can you hear us, Michelle?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can hear you. Can you hear us?
Yes.
There we go.
I just wanted to comment on, I noticed on your agenda you have a discussion about classroom size, and I wasn't really sure exactly what you were going to be discussing about that, but I noticed that for the national average, the classroom size is 16, and in Vermont, for this academic year, the average classroom size is 12. The state, as far as I know, doesn't really have any recommendations as to the maximum classroom size, but they do have a recommendation for the minimum, which is 10. I also just wanted to point out that a lot of that could also depend upon what age group we're talking about. I think most classroom teachers agree that primary students need to have a lot smaller classrooms than other ages, just because early intervention is the key, of course. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Could you state your last name just for the record?
Faye, F-A-Y.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anyone else interested in making a public comment? Okay, seeing none, can I get a recommendation to approve the minutes of November 14th?
I'll make a motion.
Barb, in a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Jamie. Any questions or comments on the minutes? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Great, thank you. Bills.
Okay, I have a cold, so I have my mask on. Haven't worn it in a while in here, but anyway. First is the general fund. These were read on the 21st of this month. Barb and I read them. So on the 21st, on the general fund, it's $414,746.16. And there's two payrolls, one for $2,573.85, and the other one for $929,423.02. So no problems with the bills, and I make a motion to pay them.
And I'll second.
Great, thank you. Any questions or comments for the finance team?
Okay?
Seeing none, all those in favor of paying the bills, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions? Great, the bills can be paid. All right, Dr. Burrows.
Thank you. Well, one, it was, I think this was our first time that we've officially had 1 week off at Thanksgiving, and everything I heard today from folks coming back from break was very positive. So I think we'll be continuing to have this week off and not schedule. If you all recall, we used to have school Monday and Tuesday. A few years ago, we switched to professional development Monday and Tuesday. Last year, we were supposed to do professional development Monday and Tuesday, and we called it off and said, everyone just take time. And this year, we scheduled no professional development and having the time off. So anyway, just to let everyone know, as we go into calendar development for next year, we'll definitely continue to have this week off. I think 99.9% of the people I've talked to have been highly supportive of it.
This is statewide.
It's not statewide. It's not statewide, but I think increasingly districts that did have school on Monday and Tuesday, and some had actually a half day on Wednesday. have shifted. And oftentimes with something like this, if enough districts move in one direction, there's increasing pressure on the other districts to follow suit. So I haven't looked recently, but I'm pretty sure most have moved or are moving in this direction.
South Burlington had the same schedule we had.
Yeah.
I just want to put something in for the 0.1%. This was a difficult week.
Yeah.
There's no childcare, there's no after-school programs, there's nothing running, and I had to figure out on a day-by-day basis how I was going to work. I have no saved time off because I've had to quarantine 7 times for COVID. Normally I run a balance and I'm able to use it, but the time I had to take off this week was unpaid, and it was a really stressful week. So like day by day, just trying to figure out what Henry was going to do. And it was a lot easier for me when it was just like Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, because then I could at least work other days. But so, and it trickles down to the people on my team because they don't know if I'm going to be there or not. And so like I was able to figure it out, but I'm like the 0.1%, but there's probably others like me where the half days are also so hard, like, because I end up I only get to work for like 2 or 3 hours. So it might not be the majority, and it's probably better for the teachers, but it would be different if we had coverage, like Mary Johnson can't run. There's no other programs available. Like if we're gonna do that, and that's like a long-range plan, if we could try to have some conversation about childcare, supplemental something on all these early dismissal days. You know, for me, it's easier to have 1 full day off, in a quarter rather than like a half day. Like there was one day a couple weeks, or 1 week where it was like a half day, 1 day, and then a Friday off. So, and like I'm lucky at work that I do get paid time off. I'm depleted because of COVID. Right. But there are a lot of people who, their job that they have, they don't even have paid time off. And some of these kids are sitting home alone. They're like, 7 years old, and they're just home alone all day because they have nowhere else to go. Or like, a family with, a 3-year-old and 8-year-old, whatever, and they're just like all home together, like, so I don't know. I just want to represent the 0.1. So, but yeah.
Well, in terms of, I definitely see that as an issue, but I think it's beyond just the 2 days or 3 days or however many days of Thanksgiving, but in general, like after school care, summer, like all those pieces, which tend to expand beyond school, right? To like community and school and partnership, and how do we work to take care of all those things. In terms of the contract and the calendar development, pretty soon I'll be meeting with the other 2 superintendents. So by statute, we're required to plan for calendar days with our Addison County districts that all go to Hannaford. So that's the law, that we all have a calendar essentially that's aligned so that students attending the Career Center aren't disadvantaged from one district versus another, because Hannaford would have to follow one of the districts. And contractually, we have a certain number of student days and a certain number of faculty days each year. And so those, we might have more one month than another, but we have to make up, the 175 student days and the 187 faculty staff days, and then obviously some employees work longer than that. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I don't know what the solution is, because like the college students are away, and that's like a big piece of the staffing for those. But I just wish there was something we could do to provide for those days off, not just for me, but for like all these people. It's a huge problem.
Yeah,
It has been for years. Yeah.
I know at least for half days at Salisbury, the support staff would run half-day programming.
That would be
to
so
provide
amazing.
They didn't have to do a lot of the professional development that was offered, so they got paid a full day. And so just, there's some options, I think, within our school staff, but I think you're right. I think some of it has to be the community and working with other options. Sometimes there's vacation camps, so maybe thinking through if we're going to do a Thanksgiving one, can there be something that we can work with the community to plan for?
Middlebury Rec is doing a February break camp.
Yeah.
it's like over $200,
Yeah.
so it's like, but
Yeah.
at least they're offering something, so it's like, oh, okay, I can calculate this, into my budget,
That's hard.
but yeah, we have so many brilliant people involved, we gotta be able to figure something out.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally agree.
I think it's very
Um, So strategic plan development, I just wanted to kind of briefly talk about that. I'm going to hand it over to Mary Heather to have her share what was just talked about in the Communications and Engagement Committee regarding the strategic plan. So we are getting close to that point of putting together the action teams. We're kind of finalizing that kind of process of sending out an invite, and are hoping to do that at the end of this week with the announcement of the board outreach, which Mary Heather was going to talk about. On another note related to the strategic plan for equity and kind of what we did about a year ago when we paused our ACSD student equity team as we engaged in the strategic plan for equity, it's been clear to me like throughout this year, and especially as I attend things outside of ACSD and see students coming together to talk about what they're doing in the districts, that it would be really, really beneficial for us to also be supporting that work, for our students to be both kind of locally, but also working statewide with other students to work on equity issues together and bring that back. There's a lot of energy in that. So it's something I talked about briefly with Michaela at Moms today and Justin as well. So we're going to be working on trying to get that group to continue working together, and maybe have a portion of that group working with me on the kind of like state level and opportunities that exist through lots of different organizations in Vermont, to be doing that work in collaboration with other Vermonters, and then having that be part of the kind of the energy of the work happening here too. So I just wanted to mention that. Mary Heather, do you want to share about the...
Yes, so just to give everyone an update on the communications and engagement part of the strategic planning stuff. So we as a board had approved 3 of our goals and come together around the definition of equity, and kind of did that work with Emma a while ago now, and we wanted to make sure that we presented what we've done so far and explained the process so far to the community before we kick off the action team, who will be translating those goals into actionable tasks. So we are going to be having sort of a public, I guess, an outreach event or info session. We were sort of struggling around around what to name it. A community conversation around just the strategic planning so far. So we've selected December 6th. It's actually next week. At 5:30, it'll be right before the high school's music concert. So we're actually hoping to get some of those folks to come and check us out as well, and pick up some handouts as well. So it'll be a pretty simple, just a little slideshow about the process that has happened so far, how the how the advisory committee was put together and helped, formulate priorities to then give to the board, and how we developed our own goals and settled on a definition of equity, and then obviously present those goals and definitions, and then kick off with an invitation for folks to apply to be part of the action team, to actually translate those goals into action items. And then the following day, Wednesday the 7th, we'll have a similar event, but it'll be all virtual for anyone who couldn't come on Tuesday. So we're going to be putting an ad in the Addison Independent for this week's paper. We'll do an email blast, obviously post on our website. So talk it up. We'll have links to the application itself. So if you know folks who are interested in getting involved or want to just know what we're up to in the strategic planning process, give them a heads up, direct them to that. And then from that point, the team will come together, the action team will come together to actually do the work of creating the meat and potatoes of our plan, and we'll probably revisit again with another outreach effort a little bit later in the winter. So, yeah, Barbara.
Yeah, so the virtual, I didn't hear the time of that one. Is that
Oh,
by
sorry,
vir-
that'll be 7 o'clock
Okay,
on Wednesday the 7th. And I'll have Heather, will create a link for that, so we'll get that out.
Are we doing a virtual option for the other one?
No, it's either or, so it's in person or virtual, yeah.
I was asked that today.
Yeah. It was just gonna be too much, yeah.
I'm trying to think, it's such a short time, it's next week already. How we make sure we get it out to the most folks, and I'm wondering if we have the schools maybe send out the information as well to their list?
Well, I'm thinking it'll probably be part of the weekly report.
Okay.
We can ask Emily to make sure that gets on
We
there.
talked about it this morning and talked about doing something separate so it stands out.
Yeah, because otherwise there's so much in some of those that
Right.
you may not.
So we did specifically talk about doing an email blast and then also
Okay.
having it distributed on her regular social media channels.
Yeah.
And I guess the one other thing, I don't think we yet have a district account for Front Porch Forum, but that would be the other
We
thing
don't,
that we
no.
could maybe have a couple of board members. So we'll get content to you from our committee to get that out.
Will the AD&D come out in time to have the,
Yeah, I've been assured by Christy that if we get content to her by tomorrow, that it'll be in this week's paper.
John's here too.
Yes. So that's, yeah, just to, touch base with the community, let them know where we're at with that, and then just move forward.
Third thing, budget development. So we're working through kind of final pieces of our centralized budgets. I think we're feeling pretty good by the look of Matt's body language. And seem like they're going okay. And I think we'll be ready for that first draft coming shortly. One thing I wanted to mention in relation to the budget development and what we're talking about, I know we've talked a lot about FY24 and then FY25 and what kind of how we're trying to look ahead to 25 because of the loss of ESSER funds, and we see it as a time where we really have to be, we're going to be on the heels of the conclusion of the strategic plan for equity. We're going to have a lot of convergence in FY25. And one thing that we are doing to prepare for that is looking at different software right now to look at data, to be able to have kind of a one-stop data warehouse or data platform dashboard where we can access all of the different kind of data feeds that we're currently having to create individualized reports for. We recognize as we start to make challenging budget decisions going into FY25 that we're going to have to do it based on data. And so we see a lot of communication ahead in the community, at the board level, at the school level, talking about kind of where we are, looking at where we want to go. We're not going to just use quantitative data. We're always going to have a combination, right, of quantitative and qualitative data as we make decisions about where we're headed. But we will be needing that as we look at what kind of staffing we want to see, looking at staffing across all of our schools. We've talked about some of the challenges we have of especially we're in year 6 now as a unified district, but we still have some vestiges of what was, and that's great, but we need to be able to assess everything to make sure that the resources we have are going to the students in most need, and to all students so that everyone's getting what they need, both of those things. So that's something that we're working on, and we talked about this in our last budget presentation. We are seeing this budget primarily supporting the additional services and additional kind of response to the pandemic that we have been engaging this year with the FY23 budget. So that's what's going on.
One comment on the loss of ESSER funds. It's not like we went into spending the ESSER funds in a way that didn't look at this so that we would be hopefully not having such a cliff.
Yeah.
because those funds, you know, were meant, obviously, to support some of the negatives that came about with the pandemic. And so I just want to make sure that public understands that. If we didn't just say, oh, here's $2 million, let's go at it. And then all of a sudden say, well, how can we add this to the budget next year? So, I mean, we've heard you say that, but, and the presentations in the past have stated that too, but it's an important point, I think, to make. That
I think my experience is when we've added additional positions in a building and people feel that they're effective,
it's hard to get rid of.
yeah, they're hard to, they're hard to let go.
I understand
Yeah,
that completely, but I just want to make sure that
Yeah. No, we have been thinking about that and
this has
talking
been
about it.
ongoing with everybody thinking about it, so.
Yep, yep.
And some positions, I believe you said, have been to put systems in place so that in the time of crises, we have an extra person and
Right.
extra support and thinking longer term about systems so that the rest of the staff can follow those systems and maybe not need that person in place, I believe is a goal, correct?
Oh, definitely, yeah.
Any other questions for Peter? You're good?
I'm done.
Wow.
Wow.
All right, moving right along.
It was a long one last time, so we're.
7 o'clock. All right, report of the board. Facilities. Yeah, I'm gonna hand it over to you.
I think we have a presentation we're going to share. There was a presentation shared in board pack, but there were a couple of minor updates that were made late breaking this afternoon. If you have, do you have access to the
I do.
Google Doc? Yay! Yay! So I'm going to start us off, and then I'm going to invite Matt and Bruce to talk about the more detailed pieces. Yeah, why don't you just make up bunny ears?
So, yeah,
Just have like
One over each shoulder.
so Jen, is this the one we're looking at, or is this a different one?
Ish, it's very close.
Okay,
So the
so-
first, it's the first slide is gonna be the same, the second slide I think it's the same. There's a new fourth slide, so there's just a couple of little last minute, as we were talking
Bruce will
through
have to. 'cause
how
this
the
is-
conversation would go, we realized maybe we needed a little bit more, so I'll try to point out where I go.
You can share it? Okay, great.
Okay.
Thank you.
And it shouldn't be,
You share it to everyone?
yeah,
Okay.
it's not like it's like vastly,
Yeah.
it's just we added a couple of little things to
Okay.
help with clarity.
Okay.
It's better, right?
Hopefully, that's always the goal. All right, so I'm gonna do the first three, I think. So just to, kind of echo what's already been said in public comment and in the past, we started this a long time ago. The board, when we unified, wanted to look at all of the facilities and kind of take stock on where we were and where do we want to invest. So we had commissioned a company to look at our facilities. We had a school dude report that was very kind of outdated and felt like that was just way too abstract. So we went into each school and had experts going into each of the schools to look at what our anticipated needs might be. And we understand that those reports aren't perfect, absolutely. We didn't, as a board, I believe, feel like we wanted to then send experts back into the schools to tell us what we already knew, that they weren't perfect. We didn't ask them to update the reports, but we know that the reports aren't perfect. We're using them as a guide and know basically big picture. We have old buildings that need a lot of work. We have some failing systems, and we have some systems and infrastructure that is not up to current code. And so that is a fact, and any money that we put into the school would, of course, we would look into that more closely, and with Bruce, obviously there. But just to kind of set that stage where, yes, we can look at each little line and say, is that piece necessary or not right now? That's not really our goal right now. Our goal is to see, yes, there's huge needs, and we need to do something about it. And so what is it, right? Our committee knows that, and has talked about this a lot, that there's some competing priorities. We don't really know how we should move forward as a committee, and so we're asking the board for some direction regarding the scope, how big, how much money can we ask for, which schools, which level of the priority system should we address. And we just wanted to clarify on that last bullet that any of these options are only addressing the core needs. As a board 3 years ago, we talked about sort of what our ideal school might look like, and that was our guiding principles. And we've talked a little bit about what would our criteria be to close a school, and that wasn't ever something that we talked about. It was more positive in that, what do we want our schools to be? What do we think a great environment would be for our students? And that was what we were envisioning and thinking about, how do we get there? Not sort of the negative about, like, do schools meet those criteria, and if not, we're going to close them. That was never sort of our conversation. It was more in the positive of, what do we want our schools to look like, and how do we achieve that? And this this money does not do that. Unfortunately, we never got there with our conversations in the past. Okay, so what you'll see coming up is a priority system that was presented to us from the architects and experts who looked at our schools, as far as the level of how to, the needs that need to be addressed. And you've seen this, you saw this about a month ago. The reality also is that there are financial barriers that it was mentioned again in public comment, that we can't just ask for, you know, the ultimate amount of money that you'll see on these big ticket items. Our community is probably not going to be able to support that. So we are likely not going to be able to address every need on that list. So we want to be smart about it. Again, we're asking you for some guidance as far as where to invest. And you'll see what's maybe not even slide 6 anymore, but it might be more like slide 7, a menu of some scenarios. Okay, so this is a new slide. You don't have this, or you didn't have this. This is sort of just, we wanted to just like summarize it a little bit, where we're going to review the facilities needs and some of the discussions from the committee. We're going to ask for some guidance from the board. Basically, should we go out for a bond, yes or no? If we go out for a bond, what are we looking at there? What would you like us to pursue moving forward from here? A certain dollar amount, certain needs that you see on those lists. That's kind of what we're going to be asking from you at the end of this. And if you decide that you do feel like we should go for a bond, then we would review that process in the impact. And you'll probably hear about that anyway in a more higher level. All right. And I think this is Bruce.
Yeah, we're gonna go
Tag team
style here. As I think we've all looked at before, the priority system is what gets used to rank all the different deferred maintenance and systems renovation projects. It allows us to section off things into different priority levels, which we're going to see how those break down in the next slide. With the idea being that it's a way to make a strategic plan that also factors in the things that are the highest level of need. So. Priority 1 are items that reflect code issues and failed systems. So code issue could be something like an ADA compliance, or what else?
Right, so for ADA, for example, we have in some places in our buildings sinks that have cabinets underneath them. Well, that's an ADA violation because you need to be able to roll a wheelchair up to the sink. So, you know, things like that would have to get changed. Other code compliant things, we have some outdated fire alarm systems in some of our buildings. They don't meet today's codes. They need to be replaced. Even though they still function, they need to be updated. You know, egress lighting, actually, we had a power outage not too long ago in Middlebury, and it really brought to light
or not, our lack of, emergency lighting in places. And so we've been addressing that, through the regular budget as we can, but it's a fairly widespread problem throughout our buildings, just because of the age of the construction of the buildings and what was acceptable when they were built.
One of the things that we're going to see throughout the presentation is that priority one doesn't necessarily mean that it's like the biggest ticket item that a school might need. It can be as simple as repainting the handicapped logo on a spot in the parking lot, because that brings it up to code compliant. So it can be a small ticket item, but it does have to be there in order to meet code requirements. Priority two can be some of those bigger ticket items, because these are systems, whole building systems, that are reaching the end of their usable life, even if they don't present a clear safety hazard to the people using the building. So what would examples be?
Yeah, so an example of a priority two would be, circulating pumps for a heating system in a building that are, at or beyond their end of their life. So the risk you run is that they fail during a critical time. It's 10 blowout, your pump fails. That could cause a lot of freeze-ups in the building and a much bigger problem. So those would be items that you target to replace ahead of time before they fail. And basically, you renew the life. And today we can get much more efficient equipment than what's already there. So that would save us some money. Not, the return on investment isn't low enough to really, in some cases, it's not low enough to really make it, an advantage right off. However, the reliability is something that you're looking for to avoid having an emergency.
And then real quick, the priority three are items that would be adding on to a school, a new computer lab or something that kind of brings us closer to what that ideal school is. And for the sake of this presentation, we didn't really touch on any of those, because this is just about kind of looking at deferred maintenance projects. So here's the...
I would just mention, related to priority three, even priority three in these assessments doesn't include expanding or adding on, like, it's within the current envelope, correct?
Yeah, so the priority threes in the Truex Collins report do not include expansion of any buildings or adding to any footprints. It's strictly, redoing spaces to better meet the needs of educational
20%
requirements.
learning environments.
Yes.
Does priority have any, is there like an equity principle that has to do with priority at all? Kind of like there was with the PCB testing, like certain schools qualify to get testing first. Is there anything like that?
No, we haven't built, that was not built into this assessment. The stuff that the state is doing, they incorporate that into their formulas. But just for the purposes of the analysis of the buildings, we didn't take into account, geographic location or economics or any of that. It was just, looking at that.
Question. Since codes are going to continue changing from year to year, my question is, in terms of these code violations, are we grandfathered into what we have right now, so that in fact we don't have to go after these new codes?
Some things are grandfathered. However, as soon as you go to do a project, then everything is on the table, basically. So as long as you don't do anything, it can stay the way it is.
Until it all fails.
Until it fails.
So the menu of options that we put together here, it's probably best understood if you start at the bottom and work your way up, which is to say, because of the volatility in the construction market, the fact that these options were based around the Truex Collins project in 2018, and then edited in 2020 to bring them up to.
Well, 2020 we added the high school, middle school reports.
Okay, and then when did the pricing?
So that's when they added those reports.
21.
21,
This is 21, yeah.
So this
Yeah.
pricing is 21, but the project started in 2018.
Yeah.
I believe there were three different.
Yeah.
We had
Yeah.
the initial 18, we had a reassessment of that, I think in 2020, just for elementary, and then we had, the secondary was 21, late 21 into 22.
Right.
We've just seen that there's been a ton of volatility in the market, so it's really hard to say with any certainty that these are going to be true,
Right.
even though we are using them as our best.
Yeah, and also to the point that was brought up during the public period of the meeting, these are a very high-level assessment. You know, that we will have to go in and drill down and look at whatever you decide to do within that scope. We'll tear apart what needs to be done. And just as was mentioned, you know, we'll need a consultant to help do that.
Question. It may have been at the last meeting, but didn't somebody do some research on some of these costs that had been promoted and found out that using local people, local craftsmen, that it was going to cost less than what was in the report?
It's a possibility. Again, this was a very high-level report,
Yeah.
so they did use, you know, regional numbers rather than, you know, construction in Middlebury.
And I think as the public commenter alluded to, we would see some savings on individual projects or things that perhaps upon closer examination could be deferred even more. But we're also pushing that up against increasing construction costs. So we have things that are driving prices up, even if we are seeing some things that go down too. So it's hard to know where the net's going to be.
And we haven't overlaid yet, because we've gotten an assessment from outside, but we haven't put our own imprint on this to say, these are spaces that we feel really need remediation. Whether someone else thinks they do or not, we feel, like our community feels, our students feel, our staff feel, that layer is not on top of this. And so that's just something to keep in mind as we go forward.
So, Mary, did you?
Yeah, I have a question about the HVAC system and the ESSER funds that were, I think some of that money was supposed to be spent for improving ventilation. Have we used up that money and done some stuff already?
It's allocated for ventilation at Mary Hogan. That project is in the design phase, but it hasn't been, the ESSER funds haven't been expended yet because we're still in the design phase.
But it's allocated?
But it's allocated
Okay.
for that, yes.
Okay.
So that's a good example of one item where it could affect the Mary Hogan.
Yes,
priority.
that'll
Yeah,
change.
that's a really good example.
Exactly, that'll change
Right.
the total for Mary Hogan's
Right.
needs.
We're not going to double count.
So the whole range is displayed here from, you know, just sort of high school and middle school P1 renovations all the way up to pretty much everything that Truex Collins identified could be done. And then some of the other middle options. I think that, you know, during the committee meetings, we were all kind of interested in adding an option 6, and so that's a new one on there, just to put it out there that there's an option where we're sort of strategic about how we pick P2 projects, and then, you know, use money to meet the P1 needs to kind of bring everything up out of that priority. These are some of the things that we just talked about, which is, you know, that we're working with some older data here. In 21, we saw that the prices went up 88.5% to what we just saw on the last slide. Truex also uses a 10% cost per year escalation factor, so that's kind of whatever year this bond winds up going out in, you could kind of project those prices would increase at about 10% per year since 2019 or 2021. Sorry. And then I guess the other piece of it is, you know, with housing slowing down, we might see costs dropping in the next year, and it might be a strategically good year to start thinking about you know, pushing forward with projects, because if it's a recession or not, it's always you know, a good time to be strategic about how you kind of catch the trough there. The economy comes down.
Just a pie chart we threw together with some of the data, kind of give you a visual representation of how these costs break out over the district. As you can see, you know, the lion's share is at the high school, and really that's because that's the biggest building in our inventory. And it's gonna, so it's proportional. You know, the middle school's got a big chunk, Mary Hogan has a big chunk, and then all the other schools kind of fit into a piece of pie the size of Mary Hogan. So, you know, and then if we look at just the priority one breakdown, again, the high school adds even, I think even a little larger percentage than the others. Obviously, the elementary schools vary quite a bit. Depends on which, you know, how old the building is, what the condition of the systems are. You know, Shoreham looks a little disproportionate in this, and I think if we were to take a couple of the things out, like the paving, and you know, they cited a roof issue, and we actually had a structural engineer go back in and assess it, and we already performed the work to fix it. So there's some costs that are represented there that are no longer actual costs.
So we put a couple of these in just because.
Eye test.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah. For the high school and middle school, this is what Truex gives us in terms of a priority system, where those first three small columns represent a 1, 2, or a 3. It's just to show that it's an exhaustive list of criteria for the building that they're going over. So when we talk about the story of a school, you know, we're going to see bullet points where, you know, you might have 1, 2, 3 bullet points that highlight certain things at a school that might need to be done. But each school's list of projects is much more detailed than that, and it kind of looks like this on paper. So that's why we threw some images up there, just so you can have an appreciation for the level of detail that the reports go into. You can go to the next one too. Again, these might be better read through than spoken through, but they're samples from the reports picked from each of the schools as an example of what a P1 or P2 could be, which is not to say that these represent somehow the highest priority items. As a whole, the slides are designed to show you across the whole inventory of buildings what P1s could look like, what P2s could look like, by drawing specific examples from the report for each school. So ADA compliancy, or compliance we see here, 911 compliance are kind of code things. A cracked chimney is more of a structural engineer, building safety type thing. Exterior wood shingles and paints, and then the roof. So we see two different roof issues here, sort of roof-based issues. That chimney one is a P1 because it represents a health or safety concern to the building users. The second one is the roof's at the end of its usable life. That roof project is a $100,000+ line item that, you know, again, shows that the P2s can hold a lot more of the cost than the P1s sometimes.
Just a quick question. You know, you talk about how, you know, once you start, you all of a sudden have to do everything else. That's a code issue. So, like, just as an example, if you replace this chimney or fix this chimney, does that automatically trigger that we therefore have to do ADA compliance with bathrooms or install the E911 compliant phone system?
Good question. There's like a level. It depends what systems you touch. So if we're working on the chimney, I believe we could do that without having to dismantle anything inside, you know, or start to, you know, tear apart the interior of the building. So I believe we would, you know, dodge the bullet there. But as soon as, you know, we move in and start to do things inside the building, then we'll be subject to bringing it up to current code for everything.
It was really just a question, not
Yeah.
any objection to being ADA compliant.
Right.
No, it's true though, because, you know, there are certain items where we can say, like, if we do this, it's loaded because it comes with these other 4 or 5 cascading items that have to be part of that one. So it's not as simple as just saying, you know, pick option A or option B.
Right, and that is really where we'll need to step in and say, okay, we may have to wait on this just because, you know, if we do this, we're gonna end up having to replace all of the ceilings, all of the lighting, you know, and it'll really mushroom. But we'll have that ability when we know what we, you know, when we have a direction on what we want to do, we'll then take that closer look at everything to drive, you know, develop a really detailed scope.
In Ripton, we saw there's the sink example that Bruce has talked about, fire alarms. Whereas on the P2 side, we've got an air handler and
Yeah, so that's a fairly minor thing, you know, for P2, the broken damper actuator arm, and I think we fixed it.
I think we fixed it by taking it out.
Off the list.
Yeah, we just shut that off.
Well, and so that's one other point of this, right? So our question to begin with was bond or no bond. And no bond means there's going to be things that need to be replaced, right? And so some things already have because we've had funds in the system. There is a facilities budget. We've used our capital reserve from our whatever it is, unspent money from our budget, surplus spending. And so we could allocate more money, you know, in our budget to be able to take care of those things as they come up. So that is a reality, and it's not like Bruce and his team are saying if there's no bond, you know, these schools are just going to crumble and good luck. We're still maintaining the buildings to the best of our ability as the needs that Bruce sees and the schools see come up, right? And so that, I think that is something that we all need to keep in mind as we go through these lists and, you know, see the big list that they gave us that they're on top of a lot of this. And, you know, we'd like to be able to tackle more of them because there's been so much deferred maintenance, but it's not like we're not going to do anything if we don't.
Yeah, and from a bonding, you know, from my simple understanding, there's some advantage in the sense that you can group things together. What you're doing is you're spreading the payment for those over time. So it's not like, you know, it's all hitting the budget at the same time, you know. So it's really carrying that loan or that bond through its life, you know. So whereas if you're doing them piecemeal, it could actually have higher implications on the budget, you know, if in fact you have to do some repairs.
Right.
So it's this balancing act, right?
It is. I mean, if you use the Truex inflation of 10% a year for construction and compare that to whatever your bond rate is, if you buy it all in 1 year and your interest rate on the bond is lower than 10%, you know, in theory you've saved money by doing it all at once.
Right.
Well, and also with the cost of construction, if you look at doing, you know, taking $30 million and spending it today, and you spend, what could we realistically put yearly into a budget? Maybe $1 million?
Right.
So
It's
30
a long
years
time.
of $1 million a year, you're having to do things piecemeal, and you're spending that $1 million in 30 years is worth 200,000, right?
Well, go ahead, Chip has his hand up first.
You know, the other thing, not an elephant in the room, but the other a major factor too, is that, you know, when all these buildings were built, at least the middle school and the major renovations to the high school, as people say, the new school, which is the middle school, which is now 25 years old, there was state aid of 30%. That was a tremendous balance. that hasn't been around for a long, I don't know how long, Peter, but it's not been around for a long, long time. And looking at what the state's going to have to deal with, whether it's PCBs or whether it's other types of things, we can't count on that of any type, I would think. Although, I would have to say that as a state, somebody's going to have to address it, because these districts, we're not the only one. Everybody's in it. No one's built a new school in 20-something years. When has that happened? Because there isn't that ability to at least spread the cost out across the state. Now, maybe that's going to happen with the Burlington issues and some of these other huge bond issues, but that's an issue. That is not a basis on what decision we make, but it's a different world right now than it was when our district and a lot of other districts expanded and were built.
Mary?
I have another question about the, some efficiency in terms of the Inflation Reduction Act, which there's a lot of money going into energy efficiency and repairing old buildings, all that stuff. I mean, lots and lots of money. And I listened to Bill McGibbon the other day talking about how he's so bullish on this act because he says it's going to transform, if it's done right, our buildings and our infrastructure. Is this something we can take advantage of? I mean, I don't know enough about it other than what I'm just reading about the amount of money that's going to be pushed out to get these efficiencies in.
Yeah, I don't know how the money's being dispersed at this point, but clearly it sounds like a lot of money is being made available. Certainly that would be, something that we look at closely for whatever project we're doing and try to take full advantage of it.
Yeah.
There's nothing in it that specifically says schools.
It doesn't.
No.
Can there be?
Talk to your congressmen and senators for that one.
Yeah.
I mean the ones in Washington.
Yeah, the Washington. So that is an initiative that we really need to be, as citizens of the United States, pushing for.
Yeah. Again, it
Schools
is not in any way targeted towards schools, unfortunately. Because if there's anybody should get some serious bang for the buck, they would be schools.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like we need to take an action item though, as a committee, to maybe do some investigation as to what that could do. Because that could enable us, to do a bond and take it further and include maybe some energy efficiencies that, based on what we're doing here, I don't see us being able to do.
We need a fairly defined scope to be able to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was part of our ideal school model.
Yeah,
was
but
to
we might be
have-
able to pick up a little bit more
Sure.
if we could get some of this, justification for some of this money too.
The committee can certainly look
Yeah.
into that. If that seems
So-
like that's a possibility. It sounds like maybe not, but maybe there's.
Well, we don't know.
I'm not even sure
Some
that
funds.
it's been completely written.
No.
Yeah.
We can spend our time writing to our congressman.
So, Will, could you go to the end of the school by school? There's a board discussion slide. Just pause on that for a
Yeah,
minute.
so there's more details basically about every school, some kind of
Okay.
high level.
Back one.
We wanted to pause here in the middle of the presentation roughly to open it up for discussion. It feels like a good place to do that because everyone's started to discuss anyways. So I think that, I think the main agenda item is yes or no on that first bullet point. Should we go out for a bond? And remember that it's a one-year process leading up to the actual ballot vote for that bond. So it's, we've seen the work that needs to be done today, and we'll be looking at voting on this in 24 town meeting, 2024. And work to commence after that. So we're potentially 3 years away from 2.5 years away from breaking ground on any of these projects.
I do think, Matt, just that in order to sort of, for the board to answer the first question, I do think it's important to go through your next slides, which sort of which lay out what it means for the taxpayer.
Sure.
The different scenarios. Does everyone else agree?
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I
Sure.
think the more information is better.
Got it.
Super.
All right.
Didn't want to overwhelm everybody, we wanted to give a chance for.
No, I appreciate that.
So we've got a study here, studying the tax impact of bonds on property tax. And so on the left in that green column, you can see all the different slices of bond amount. And then in the far right column, the percentage on average that tax rate would change. You have to take all this with a grain of salt because the other thing that gets layered on top of this is the income sensitivity tax credit. So this study is just clean and doesn't show any of those effects, even though those would be part of it. So for the sake of looking at the numbers, just assume that after the first year, there's no change in education spending. So once we kind of set this this year's budget, which we've projected at, I think for the sake of this, 5%, and then calculate the tax rate based on that, that 24 budget, all these tax rate changes kind of happen within that hypothetical context. So again, here's a walkthrough of how you're going to get the tax rate. We estimated the property tax yield, which is a number that we're going to get from the states pretty soon, next week or so. We picked last year's number, I believe, a little, maybe a $500 increase. So that's the first number, and then the weighted pupils, we use the new formula for what we expect our weighted pupils to be this year. We took last year's budget and just increased it by 3%, so it's a very small increase in the local budget, giving us a very small increase in per pupil spending, and that gives us that first district tax rate number. We use Bridport as the CLA adjuster because it's the median of all of the towns in the district, which gives us that adjusted sample district tax rate. And our sample home that we're working with here is a $350,000 house. The baseline property taxes before any bond on that house would be $5,915. The bond term that we were proposing was 25 years. And again, the ed spending would be fixed after year 0, so you wouldn't see any more of those percentage increases for the sake of this. So year 1, and there's 3 slides that take different sections from that 25-year bond period. Year 1 is I think the most humane one. Things don't.
So this is all because, I think it was me, I'm like, I don't even know what does an average of 7% increase mean for me? And I didn't think anybody else would be able to put that into their own context, so Matt did all this work to kind of show what it would be. The problem is it's an average, so it's not just every year it's going to be the same, it's going to differ from the first year, the second year's the worst, and then it tails off as we start paying down the interest. And so what he's trying to show with, a $350,000 home, like just trying to get so this wouldn't be, this may not be anybody in this room, but it's an idea of you can plus or minus a little bit and try to estimate for yourselves and for your friends and neighbors how might this affect us in real dollar terms annually. So that's what we're looking at here.
And as we zero in on the scope of our project, we can take, let's say, 40, 50, and $75 million slices, and then do a second study on top of those with the income tax
The sensitivity
calculations to show that.
And this is, essentially this is for 1/3 of our populace, right?
Would be the
These-
full amount.
These numbers, I mean, income sensitivity is
Yes.
around 60%, I believe.
Yep.
Right, but
So-
to be fair, when you pay based on income, that rate also goes up as you spend more. It's not,
Right, but
it's not a
different-
hard.
It's
Right,
just a
right,
different
it's a
number.
different calculation.
Yeah,
it's a different number.
Right, but the percentage increase is in fact similar. I think.
Similar, okay.
Yeah.
So you can see the delta in that last column of, dollars for the 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 75, and $100 million bond in year one. In year two, they go up.
I really liked year one, I was all excited.
So this is just for anybody watching or whatever, so this is the change that you're seeing is the change from today, what you're paying in taxes today, if you have a $350,000 home, to what you would pay in the first year, and then this would be how much more you would pay in your second year, depending on the amount of the bond.
But I was writing a note, so I may have missed it. So we've already gone up once in year one, and this is the
Yes.
additional increase
So
for
in
year
year
two, which is the
two-
most painful year.
Yeah, in year
Correct.
two, at a $10 million bond, you'd pay, $11 a month, give or take. But at a $100 million bond, you'd pay, $111 a month. So it's,
Oh, so it'd be, so would it be $50.70 plus $130?
No, that's the total.
Just, yeah, just the year two.
Your, that
total.
would be in what your year,
Okay, so it's not like compounding.
No.
Correct.
Oh, all right.
All right, let's go to the next one. Get that quickly. Year
Yeah.
14.
Jump to 4.
It's starting to tail off a little in 14. And then we go to 24, I think is last year. 25. Okay, so last year goes, down pretty substantially from that high mark.
I'm just curious, how many bonds do we currently have? In the last 25 years, how many bonds have we brought to the voters?
Just the roof, right? Just
Just
the 97 bond, and then we did
The roof,
a
that's
small, there was a,
I know Shoreham used to, I think theirs is paid off now, but we had a bond in
The
Shoreham.
the roof at the middle school.
Right.
and the roof
Yeah.
at the middle
That
school.
was the most recent one.
When was that?
Yeah.
The
small
middle
one
school,
must've
I
been
think
10
was
years ago?
2012.
So we're still paying that,
Right.
but that's pretty much it at this point?
It's gone
And the
down, I mean,
written-
the amount
I
has
think
gone
we
down a
have a
lot.
little
If you
bit
look
left
at the
over.
budget information,
Okay.
we paid,
It is a relatively small bond.
We don't have a lot of big bonds right
No.
now.
Yeah.
so.
My question is about considering the impact of the Hanford Career Center's bond on this big picture too, and how much that is going to be increasing for the taxpayer. So did we factor that into, I'm just thinking about the big picture and the increases in taxes that folks will be paying for that improvement. So the starting.
top of- yeah,
yeah.
So the
Yeah.
starting point is different than
Yeah.
what we're assuming, I guess.
We'd have to figure out what that,
I'm sorry, I missed the first part of your question?
So my concern is that we're thinking about this, but we're not factoring in the bond that was just passed for the Hannaford Career Center
Yeah.
improvement, and that the starting point amount that folks will be paying. I'm just,
I think we're just trying to show the difference of what a bond would be,
Right.
we're not really trying to estimate what it would be next year. We're not
Right.
doing the bond next year,
Right.
so everything's gonna be different.
Right.
So I think what slide 23 on my deck
No,
was
I'm
showing
not
was
talking, I-
just some baseline
I totally
numbers.
get that. I guess my point is that as we consider this and the tax capacity that our taxpayer community has, we have to consider that.
yeah, we're
as
stacking
well.
on top of.
We're stacking on top of it, and that's
Right.
all I'm saying.
Just from
It's
a-
not the
right.
details.
We're also stacking on top because the library is looking at a major renovation as well.
So just to be realistic,
Yeah,
that's my only point.
that's good.
In trying to evaluate this, the committee basically tried to look at it from different directions. You look at it from saying, here's priority list, this, and this adds up to a bond of X amount, okay? Or do we look at it from the other point of view, at least in the beginning, and trying to make these really huge decisions? What does a $100 million bond mean? Well, obviously, there's a lot of things that can happen within that, but this is grossly what it would mean relative to how the district would deal with this.
Yep.
So it's a little hard to know how to come by, these are such big numbers and such big issues that when we're talking about paving at an elementary school, it's not even in the same realm, okay? But I think this is one way to look at it, which is helpful, I think, to me, and say, geez, am I going to vote for a $100 million bond? I don't know. If you could convince me, am I going to vote for the other end? Yeah, but we're not going to get anything done. So this is a really, really hard issue because we just didn't know how to approach it.
Yeah, and I find myself struggling with how to approach it as well. Do you sort of pick a number and say 40 million feels right, and then you build the projects within that?
Yep.
Or do we say, these are our priorities,
Right.
and pay what it costs?
And that's, I think, essentially why we came up with that sixth
Yeah.
option,
Yeah.
was because if we found a number that we were sort of comfortable with, we knew we could at least get the priority ones that we felt every school, at least I personally feel like we can do that for every school and then build on, other needs that the district feels are really crucial to get through the next 25 plus years.
Yeah, to your stacking point, though, I think that it's also important to realize that if you make a decision in year one, then you're kind of stuck with that bond for 25 years. And then if you want to do another, if some of those things that you don't do in year one turn from priority twos into priority ones over the course of 25 years, which they all will, then you don't have a plan for those either.
I thought you were thinking we weren't going to have enough to do to spend, like if we bought too much, I'm like, oh, we'll find things to spend it on.
Because you can't just stack them on top of each other indefinitely.
Right, the bonds, yeah.
Yeah. Can we just go back to slide year 14, and you kind of look at the difference? It's not a lot of difference, unfortunately. We haven't gone down that much, right? There's still, if you look at the tax implications. So, part of me would hope, oh gosh, by the time we get to halfway through it, the impact is less, so now can we introduce another bond?
Oh,
But
yeah.
this is big enough that, when you have a small bond, yeah, you can do something like that, but these are big enough that we, I would be hard pressed to see us doing another bond.
Right. And
That's the scary part.
And I keep thinking of what the Career Center just said. That was not a small bond. So we just have to be thinking about that.
The other issue that we've struggled with is, once we had the elementary school study, which was obviously the one which drove everybody bonkers because there were going to be maybe some schools that would be closed in that situation, whether it's a positive report as Jen presented it, in that we were looking for ways to provide great education, or whether we were cutting out places that didn't make the grade or weren't worth putting money into. Still an issue out there, guys, so amongst different parts of our community. Certainly I hear that. And I think that was an issue, and then when we got the second report from on the middle school and the high school, obviously that added huge amounts of money to the whole thing, but it, then we were trying to struggle with, well, is this a bond just for elementary schools? Is this a bond just for the single schools in the district that serve the whole district? Knowing full well that issue out there, we spent a lot of time on, folks, looking at that as far as what facilities are worth putting a lot of money into. And we're sort of, in some ways, abandoning that approach. That's the way I look at it. And I don't know whether that is good. Certainly it's a good thing controversy-wise, but not necessarily, because there's other folks that will find it very controversial that we aren't addressing that at some point after
Yeah.
all this work. So
So,
I'm not taking a position, I'm just saying, this has been a struggle with the facilities committee to try to do.
yeah.
Yeah, and one additional thing, you know, having followed all of the discussion on Truitt's Collins and the various different options he presented and that kind of thing, in almost all cases, in order to help with the equity between some of the schools, he was recommending doing work on the school that was going to receive, you know, more kids. And because our buildings are tough. And so that is kind of an issue too, when you now look at a bond that may be potentially very big through necessity because of the maintenance issues. You know, in the future, how could we then introduce yet another bond to, you know, really take into account some of those inequities that Truitt's Collins identified, you know, based on different schools. If you should, you know, want to close, you know, if we should want to close a school. So it's really complex, and it's hard to get your head around it.
So I don't know how, if you want to go around the room and ask folks sort of where they're.
Well, I think the first question to be answered really is if we feel that we and the community would be ready to discuss bonding. And then if yes, I think the two approaches, do you pick a number that you think the community can absorb from a tax perspective and then work backwards? Or do you say, we're gonna, you know, make every school ADA compliant, let's see how much that costs? Or let, you know, and pick projects. I think those are the two. I don't have the answer, but I think that's the answer that we need to find. And so maybe it's worth going around and just taking a poll of folks if they have a
Would it help if we put up that option slide?
I think we're just doing the yes or no first, right? Or
But
doing that all at
might
the same
help
time?
people If we put up that one slide that just
I
shows
think
the different scenarios.
we can do it all at the same time.
All at the
Yes,
same time.
and then give your reason
Okay.
which way you go.
Great.
Or no.
So that was slide 8, I believe, Will. Even though we said it was slide 6 at the beginning, we added some slides in.
You want to start, Peter?
I'll start, you know, and I guess I'm gonna be thinking out loud a little bit, so I may
Yep.
have to adjust as I go. But it seems that, you know, ultimately, we're gonna end up picking a number that feels like it's what the taxpayers can do in either scenario. Because if we say we wanna do all these projects, and it's $96 million,
Yeah.
we're gonna say that doesn't feel like the taxpayers can do that. So I guess I you know, to me, it seems like we sort of should pick a number. We're gonna find out from that number what we're leaving out, and we're gonna be told whether we're making a big mistake by the people who know better about our facilities. And then we will probably, you know, adjust more on the fly. So I think that's where I'm coming down at the moment. I'm also not, I have a little bit more of a positive view of the non-bonding option in that it allows the board to be a little more dynamic and able to adjust as things crop up or don't crop up over time. You know, I'd hate to pave a parking lot and then find out the school is filled with PCBs. But that can happen anyway. However, the fact of the matter is the logical economic way to go is with the bond.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I'd like to get Bruce's thought on that.
Sure.
You know,
So, yeah,
Go ahead.
we're just starting down the PCB road in our district. We've had a team come out and assess the report school. That means they just went and looked in every room and looked for suspect materials. And then within a month, I should receive a date when they're coming back to do sampling. I haven't received that date yet.
Yep.
Um,
Okay, what I meant.
Okay,
actually
I'm sorry,
was,
I cut you off.
If you could comment
Related
on
to
sort of the
bonding and
strategy of bonding and getting a big
Yep.
lump sum and spending it versus having money set aside each year to
I-
for piecemeal.
I think the timing of things, if we bond for a lump sum, it would allow us to shift money towards the PCB issue just because our testing should be pretty well complete. I think our last testing is actually in 2025, and I doubt we break ground before 2025. And so I think that if something did arise and we have this bond that's been approved, we may have to shift our scope of work, but we could address an emergent issue due to PCBs.
Yep. And do you, Peter, have a thought sort of on the idea of bonding and getting a lump sum versus trying to allocate more each year?
I think, the place that we're in, which is, I think, the place that a lot of districts are in now, is we can continue on without bonding, and kind of, that's what we've been doing for a while, and I think we can do that for a little bit longer. I think things are starting to come due in a way that it's going to be really hard for us to keep up with that approach. So I think it's possible to kick the can down the road if we feel like, okay, now is not the time, we need to kick the can down the road for another 3 years or 5 years or something like that. But it's just, my concern is it just gets that much more expensive to do all this work. So the burden that if we're talking about taxpayers, this is all work that has to happen. I mentioned earlier that the P3 world, and actually thinking about a 21st century learning environment, is also something that, those of you that have traveled to other places and seen what like a new school looks like, it feels really good. And it does impact how students feel, how staff feel, how the community feels in those spaces. Like, that's meaningful too. We're not talking about that right now, right? We're talking about just kind of like keeping our schools whole. So I don't know, Barb, you mentioned, this is the last bond we'll do for 25 years. I'm not sure we can say in 15 years what's coming, or what the state might stand up for too, at some point when they see that this is a need. So I guess I feel like, given that we have such significant needs across all of our schools, I don't see the approach of trying to put it into the budget being cost effective, or really working to do like all the things that have been identified at the high school specifically, to do all of them at once is so logical, given how connected all these systems are together. So we're going to save a lot of money and be able to lift some really large projects that, if we try to do this one by one with 1.5 million this year, maybe we have 800,000 next year, I just think it gets more challenging. That's kind of where I see things.
Could I just make a comment on that? Because that's another issue that came up. There's a formula that Rex and others use to say, okay, you put all this money into this building. What happens if you built a new building? Okay? And that gets pretty close to the amount of money at the high school. Now, realistically, no, we're not going to build a new high school.
I wanted to. They shut me down.
Well, I wouldn't mind it. I wouldn't mind it either in certain ways. But I mean, there is some logic to all of it that says you get so close with all these things that you need to do with this building that maybe you're better off not building. Now, I'm not saying any of us bought into that, but that came up.
No, and it goes the same way. You say, okay, if you look at, and I'm just using this as an example, Shoreham, Bridport, and Cornwall. Well, if the improvements needed there cost $12 million and building a new West Side elementary school costs $20 million.
And it would be a phenomenal, beautiful, state-of-the-art school.
What do you do that?
Yeah.
What do you do that? So yeah, those are things to keep in mind.
Yeah.
All right, so let's go around and speak to whether you feel that now is a moment to bring a bond to the public, and two, I think I'm leaning now, not just towards what Peter said, sort of going with a number and then backing it out from there, or going with projects and seeing how much we can get done. Who wants to start?
I'll start.
Brian?
Yes. Basically, in listening to all the conversations, some of the things that I have taken into consideration is the present financial stresses on the taxpayers. It's inflation. Everybody is hurting at this point, whether you add $5 to their taxes or $120, it doesn't matter. They are being stressed out right now. Secondly, you have this PCP issue. We don't know whether we're going to be involved in it and how much. Third, I would like to get a clearer, real cost view. I would like people who know what they're doing to go into these amounts and say, no, it's not that, it does not cost that much. We can do it for. And I guess fourth, if you set a bond, let's say for $30 million, and you don't start your work on building for 3 or 4 years, you're not going to be able to get your $30 million worth out of it because things will cost more. So what I would prefer at this point is the non-bonding flexibility, and then if necessary, if things change, if we get a clearer picture, maybe going to a bond with the taxpayers.
Thank you. Yes? Thoughts? Sure.
You know, I struggle with this a little bit because there's so many variables in this whole thing, and I've lived through the whole facilities master plan, and I'm conflicted in many different ways. Your last comment about, well, maybe better to build a new school than to renovate what we basically need to do to some of those other schools. Maybe not, but I mean, I'm just, that's part of the equation, and I don't like the idea of just waiting and seeing until everything collapses, whether it's you know, some major HVAC system or something else, boiler, or I don't know, all those things that collapse, and then you're faced with a real dilemma. It's sort of almost like the PCB, which are going to walk in to some of our schools, maybe, and say, hey guys, it's too dangerous, can't be here, figure it out. Well, what? I mean, so, you know, I struggle with it. I think I sort of feel I need a little more, I don't know. I hate to put things off, but on the other side, I can't put myself right in a place that we're gonna need a $60 million bond in order to do all this stuff. And it doesn't really have to do with how much it's going to cost. It has to do with what's the right time.
Yeah.
And of course,
I
we
will-
can always procrastinate and go down, hit the can, as they say, but.
I will say that, you know, this conversation tonight is clearly not the last, right? This is the first conversation.
Right.
So we're picking a direction to start, you know, putting our efforts towards, but it certainly doesn't mean that the conversation stops there. And,
Right.
and if we get numbers that say, you know what, the amount of money we got to put into X, we can build a new school for 10% more, those conversations then happen then, right? So I do feel like there's flexibility in it. We're not committing to a number right now, and that's the hard and fast direction. It's really just where do we want to focus our energies, in which direction. So just keep that in mind. Jamie.
Thanks. I'm seeming, I think, confused as a lot of people, maybe more. I'm confused what the phrase "pick a number" means. I was hoping someone could clarify. Like when you say that, what are you basing what are we allegedly basing our pick on, or whatever? Is it these other slides with tax implications, or is there something else?
Yeah, it's sort of what tax burden do you feel the taxpayer can
Okay. how do we, is it a gut?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, then I,
And then, so what we didn't show you yet is if we do a bond, there's sort of next steps with consultants and looking into the actual, what we would do with the money, and then community engagement, and then maybe refining based on community feedback and, what we feel like as a board we could actually propose on a vote.
okay,
We didn't get in, that's the last slide that if we kind of felt like bonding was an option.
right, okay.
Right, the process includes, as Jen said, community input,
Sure.
so that we can actually survey that community to
Right,
see,
right,
are
right,
they
right.
really, is our
that-
instinct right?
In other words, is our gut right? Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
good.
So we have to start with something for somebody to start looking at for us.
Okay, great. And then my other question, I guess, is doesn't this discussion hinge on option 6 and the kinds of P2 projects that we think we select? Like if we select more or fewer, then the option to bond or not bond changes because the reality of, doesn't it, or does it not?
It
think that's-
doesn't, because the 11.6 is the baseline.
Yeah, so let's say we're at least
we're
two.
talking about, that number 6 is selecting from 11.6 up to the total amount, which would be the 78 for all P1 and P2. So both of those would require bonding.
And it would just be the analysis of the consultants would be where we land in that, and we would work with them to figure it out, what we feel we can bear.
So if say we picked a number, say we picked 40, that would kind of fall in the 6, where we would say, okay, what are some of the real crucial needs that we can address with some of the P2 needs. Maybe there's a P3 need that we feel needs to happen
Right.
based on where they're in the school, but that was the idea, was to give some flexibility if we felt like a dollar amount was going to be more helpful than choosing one of the top 5 options.
The bottom one is essentially number 4 at the bottom
Yep.
and number 2 at the top.
Nope.
Yeah. So the bottom of the
Oh, the
range.
number range,
Yeah.
right.
Yes,
It's
the
the
number-
range
the number
between
range.
4 and 2, yes.
Right,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's,
Yes.
all that's saying is,
Yep.
it's saying, and we have this
Somewhere
number and we
between.
have this number and we can pick anywhere in between.
Correct.
That's what number 6 is saying.
Yes, it was just trying to give some flexibility.
Lindsay?
So we're still going around and like just sort of saying like what we.
Sure.
I'm like, okay, just want to make sure to me, it seems clear that we need to begin the bond process as quickly as possible, because this deferred maintenance, like, even beginning the bond process now, we're still having to do non-bond projects. And there's a good chance that the voters will not support the proposal, and we'll have to go back to the drawing board in a way and present another option. So if we put all this work and we're like, okay, we're going to choose this number that feels right, and it gets voted down. I was just looking online because the town I grew up in Connecticut just went through this process, and eventually, I think what it said, it was voted by 3 votes that they went through. And this started, the first thing I looked at, this started like 10 years ago. So it's quite possible that the voters will say no, and we have to come back again, and it might take several years to pass through a bond project. And one of the things that I worry about is there's all this talk about keeping schools open and closing schools, and I can't imagine anybody in the state doesn't have some little fear in the back of their mind, like Burlington High School. Like, we want to keep our schools open. What if this PCB thing comes back and they say, oh, sorry, we have to close 3 of your elementary schools because we found all these PCBs. It's a possibility. We have so many unknowns. So just planning ahead for that, that's a big wild card. I'm not a taxpayer in this town. I rent, so it's not going to directly affect me, although my rent could go up because my landlord has to cover their costs. So it could, indirectly or directly affect a lot of people, but, this whole deferred maintenance thing, like, it's just gonna get more and more expensive. And it's not like we're taking out of our whole budget, like all construction, and everything here. Part of the process that this town in Connecticut went through, though, was the remodel or rebuild. And they ended up building a new school, it was so close in cost by the time they did all the remediation and everything. And, this, I don't know, it just seems like this is something that we should start on, while we can. I don't know. The other thing that is interesting at a state level, in Connecticut, they have a school construction grants, and at a state level, I know it's not our place, but what's being done to try to push at a state level, or at a federal level for school construction grants, because this is happening with everybody, and it could be part of the process of like organizing, in sort of a grassroots way, that we need to have some process for, matching or something, because it's just, the last thing you want. What if Mary Hogan's heating system fails next winter? Where are all those kids going to go? There's no way to distribute, 400 plus kids throughout the other schools in the district, If, say Shoreham's heating system fails, you could distribute those kids, but it would be so expensive with the busing, so it's just going to cost more. So I don't know, but I'm strongly in favor of beginning the process. And also considering all options as we look at the numbers, including building new. I hate change. I can't stand change. I don't even like to look at the pictures of the new schools that have been built. But, if it's going to cost the same amount, then, in the end, that could be better for our students, They do feel good once you go inside them, but I'm just very, opposed to change. But.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I almost have something to say, right? So I'm sitting here tonight. I mean, obviously, we struggled in the committee. This is such a hard task, as you can all see. Appreciate, I think, just by the presentation and thinking about it in this meeting. And as I'm sitting here, an option that we didn't include is, what if, and I'm sorry, I do what ifs, and sometimes they're smart and sometimes they're not, so bear with me.
Bring it on.
It just kind of occurred to me, one option could be that, if you look at the price tag associated with the priority ones, they're not that big. And so maybe some of that we continue to have is part of our budget, right? And then select a loan amount, a bond amount, that's maybe not, this big hunkin' thing, but have it instead of 25 years, let's do a 10 or 15-year loan, bond, right? So that we're committed to say 25 million or something like that, but we pay it off quicker. It may still have the tax implication, but then we could be in a position in the future where we're not carrying this loan. And I don't know what the numbers are or whatever, but it's not something I thought of before. And it just kind of dawned on me today. I think we need to do something. I think we need to start, I agree, with, what Lindsay has had. And my gut has always been that when we worked in the committee that, I think we have to kind of identify a target based on what we think folks would be able to afford or tolerate. And then try to build what's the best thing that we can do with that money. And I think then that would lead to, well, what is then the thought process that we would use to then decide what goes in there? I think we need, as a board, to figure out, some equitable way to understand how we're going to spend that money. So it doesn't help a lot, but kind of some thoughts I just had.
Thank you.
Do we have any numbers about a shorter term, or are they all on?
I was just thinking the exact
I
same
saw
thing, though, and if there's an appetite for a shorter term, more of like a sprint payback plan, then we can definitely take a look at that as a different mechanism for repayment. So I can work up.
just wanna
25 years just sounds
remember
so
the context in which we're working. We're providing guidance to the facilities committee tonight, so let's just call that guidance.
Yeah.
Except on the, usually when you're dealing in, like, shortening the term, you don't get as favorable of an interest rate. It's like a mortgage. I mean, I think of it like a mortgage. If you want to pay off a mortgage in 15 years, you get a 30-year mortgage with the lower interest rate and then make double payments. And so we could structure something like that so that if we hit a roadblock somewhere along the line, you know, and it says, yeah, we can't make double payments this year, we can always go back to our regular amount. I mean, that's kind of the thinking around a mortgage. I don't know if that kind of financing is available at this high level with this kind of public.
So we'd be working with the Vermont Bond Bank
Mhm.
out of Burlington, and I think that, you know, bringing them in as advisors on the process would be like a logical next step to make sure that we're strategically like taking advantage of the best.
Good question.
Yeah, a lot of good ideas.
All right, Joanna and Maria Heather, you're the only ones we haven't heard from. If you want to.
I'll be quick. I want to echo, I heard Lindsay and sort of like the length of the process, and Barb's, you know, and Steve's nuanced and creative ideas. I do think being responsibly proactive makes a lot of sense. Knowing that P1 isn't all health and safety, is it?
Well, it's either
It's
code
ADA
violations
code
or, yeah.
So like if there's a way to sort of itemize or look at the P1s that can be included in the bond and some of the P1s, can that happen? Can we like look more line by line at P1, P2?
I mean, we can do deeper analysis. Analysis costs money, so.
I just, like, what can we cover in the P1 in our budget? And what do we want to bond for is, and then looking at, and so I think the question is, do we want to, do I support looking at the bond process right now, and is it hiring a consultant? Is that like another question?
That would be,
The next.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of like when a consultant comes in, the consultant could actually be here right now. We chose to have these conversations without a consultant. But I think soon, if the board wants to move forward with a bond, and again, like we could hire a consultant, we could go through the process and then we could decide we're going to table it, right? There's no requirement that once we hire a consultant that we're going to do the bond, but we're likely,
I told him
moving
not
in
to say
that-
we're hiring a consultant tonight.
There's really there's no way around it. This is what every single district in the country does. Literally, every single district
you
in the
need
country.
an expert to work.
This is like saying we're not going to have insurance. Like, you got to have insurance. We need an expert to help us through this process, for sure. So yeah, I mean, I think it would be, I mean, they mentioned 18 months for a bond of any significance, which is why we thought, you know, if the board wanted to move forward in this direction, that we would probably be looking at town meeting 24 as a likely target. But they would go through that process, I think, the next drill down of looking at P1 and P2 to determine, you know, really what's necessary and what's needed. You know, I mean, if the number is 40, 20, or 60, that assessment looks really different. So I think, and that's why we didn't want to have someone come in on the front end, but that we thought it was important for the board to talk about this first to get clear on kind of what kind of guidance do we want to provide to someone so that there's clarity around, you know, 20, 40, 60, 80. You know, in our initial conversation with them when they came in the summer to talk with the facilities committee about the MUHS and MOMS assessments, you know, they were talking about that question about old versus new at the high school, and it looks like, you know, you could just build a new high school. You know, so like the numbers start like adding very quickly as you kind of envision this you know, brave new world. And so I think the work that the facilities committee and the board has done up to this point has been helpful just to try to start to narrow down and bring clarity. But that is the next step, is getting drilled down to P1 and 2.
Yeah.
There probably are P1s that we wouldn't do.
Right.
And
Or
ones
we
that
have done.
We've done, yeah.
Or that we've done. But we don't have, in our current budget, our current facilities budget, we don't have these items in the budget to take care of. So it's not like we're taking these off and we've allocated $500,000 towards what was found. We're just kind of like limping along with that budget on other things.
And I would argue that we will continue to do so. Because that's what we want to spend it on. We want to spend it on our students and the educators for our students and materials for our students. And I don't think it's really realistic to think that we're going to tackle any big projects anyway with the budget, especially when you look at what's sunsetting and what's coming on the horizon. I just don't think that's realistic or responsible. I would strongly advocate for bonding, and I would absolutely prioritize P1 and P2, especially at MUMS or at MUHS. And just that alone is putting us at a pretty big bond. So I feel like if we kick the can down the road, we're not serving our students. That's what it comes down to. We're not serving our students or our educators. And I think we've taken an oath to do that. And so we need to find a number that feels like something that our community can sustain, and we need to prioritize what's going to positively impact the most students and educators. And I think the biggest need is obviously in our high school. That's the thing that's screaming the loudest. And all this other stuff about elementary school configuration, and I will say I think the district is missing an opportunity to really be proactive and envisioning an ideal educational environment. I'm not sure our community is ready to get behind that, and that's okay. That's okay, we serve our community, but it does nag at me this impulse to kind of preserve a living history museum for whether it was the town, the town offices, or, just this impulse. I guess I'm saddened that we're not really trying to be visionary about how best to serve our collective student body. And that's okay. But I think short of doing that, at a minimum, an absolute minimum, we need to prioritize a bond, and all of our schools should be ADA compliant. I mean, it seems so obvious to me, I guess, and that's all I'll say.
Is Middlebury College in any way a factor with this? I know that was a big thing with some of the recent major projects. Maybe we could get them to take an interest in one of our properties.
I think once we have a trajectory, we can explore all options. But Steve, did you have one last comment? No.
Yeah, I mean, I was glad to hear Mary Heather come up with that. I have always felt that we historically underfund, and that we historically underfund, we see it when we negotiate contracts, we see it when we do all kinds of things, and facilities is just another way that we are underfunding education. And I hear a lot of voices from taxpayers here around this table. I don't hear any student voices, I don't hear any teacher voices. How many of you would go into work every day into some of these situations that teachers and students are being asked to go into? And if students are that important to this community, why are they in some of the buildings that they're in? I was telling somebody the other day that we're grandfathered into not having to deal with asbestos, and they were shocked. They're saying there's still asbestos in our schools. And I said, well, as long as we don't touch it, we can kick that can down the road. And I just really hate to do that. Here we are. How long after asbestos? And it's still in our schools because we don't want to spend that money. I don't know, I can't. We gotta go for a bond, and I'm inclined. Jen, you said a new school? Yeah, we need a new school. We need a new school. Now, whether their political reality is there, it's probably not. And I would say, you know, we're not trying to scare anybody, and we did not try to scare anybody. And if we got to pick what was in the Addison Independent, yeah, this would be a very different story. But we need the 110 million. We need more than the 110 million to make these schools real schools. But I'm going to say whatever you come up with, I'll vote for. I think it should be more than less.
All right, so what I'm hearing is the vast majority around this table is in favor of a bond in the near term, and that thus everybody would, or the vast majority would support working with a consultant to help us prioritize and understand the process, to evaluate community and all of that. I'm seeing nodding heads.
Yes.
What else do you want? What else does the facilities committee?
I think that's what we asked for. Do the administrators and staff need more?
Okay. Next step, yeah.
Great. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all. I appreciate everybody's pre-reading. It felt like everybody really was here and participating, and I appreciate all of your
I'm not anti-bond, I'm just confused. No, really, I mean, I don't want to go down as
I
the
know
one
you're
who
not.
spoke against anything
Yeah.
like that, because
No.
obviously that wasn't the way I behaved in the committee.
Yeah.
I don't think I did.
No.
But on the other side, this to me is just, there's so many balls in the air at one point, or pies on.
Sticks,
Yeah, right.
But doesn't getting the consultant help us figure
I
something
hope
out?
so. Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
But, you know, I mean, that's, consultants in some realms are terrible because they cost money, and gosh, you could figure out yourself. I'm not mode, but yet we hear that too.
I just want to put out there, since we were talking about state funding and all of that, and it's an issue that I'm going to be talking about a lot. It's important to remember that in the day when we did the middle school, high school project, that these costs were really put on the local community almost 100%. And so that 30% state funding was very important. Now, if you think about our state education fund, you know, only about a third of it is, even a little less than a third, is the residential property tax, and the rest of it is sales tax, non-residential property tax. So, you know, really, no matter what you end up doing, you are being subsidized by other taxpayers in the state, just like we're paying for part of the Burlington High School.
Right.
And so I just wanted to point that out. Now, there's no question that somehow we need more going toward it. And how you allocate that across the state is, what South Burlington alone already had a failed $230 million bond. And we got schools up in the Northeast Kingdom where there are sewage pumps in classrooms, and so it's all relative, and it's an incredibly hard burden. But I think that we need to come up with a new and better system. But I did want to just point out that in fact we all do subsidize one another.
I appreciate that.
I'm just curious, you came in, I'm guessing you just came from a sports practice.
Yeah, I did, sorry.
And, so, like, do you have questions about what we're talking about? I'd love to hear your perspective on what we're talking about, and it's kind of important, but you kind of got in at more than halfway through the conversation.
I think I get the gist of it. I'm not sure if I get all the specifics. With like
We don't
where
get
all
all
the
the
money's going to be
specifics.
going, but in terms of what I know as a student is I know that students are becoming aware of how difficult it's becoming for teachers to do things. It's becoming more and more difficult for teachers to keep kids able to be focused and stuff. And I think that, like what Steve said, it's the more that you can put into it now, the better, because I mean it's definitely becoming more aware for students. And I wouldn't say I necessarily feel like my education has been impacted yet by it, but like I remember having a teacher last year who, like, she's coming in and she can't find childcare for her kid and she can't take time off because there's subs and stuff, and like there's all these things, and I think that students are becoming aware and it's somewhat impacting their education in terms of that.
Would it make a difference to have, like, you know, when, I don't know, a better building, you know? I mean, do students talk about that at all? Like,
honestly,
we don't have a sewage pump in the classroom. That would be a whole other thing. But.
I don't feel like, at least in the high school, I don't feel like anybody complains about like the building. I mean, I'm sure if they knew there was asbestos, they wouldn't be happy about that. I don't know if that's the building that was talked about with asbestos. But I think that I don't think that the building is necessarily the biggest issue, at least for students, but I do think that there are definitely things that could be focused on that are beginning to impact how much we're able to learn and stuff, and I think that that's more of the stuff to focus on. I don't know exactly what the changes being discussed for the buildings were and whatnot. I mean, I think that tearing down an entire building and making a new one is, to me, that seems like a bad idea and pretty unnecessary, unless that's the only way to deal with like a super pressing problem, but that just seems like way more than is needed, at least right now.
Okay, thank you. All right, moving on. Policy hearing.
But Jane, this is your presentation.
So.
Yes.
You're up.
Okay, so there's a number of policies that were listed for us to vote on. The policy committee presented these back in October for review, and we're here today just to finalize and amend these policies. So you've all had 2 months to look them over, and
daily.
So we're here to take any comments or questions so that we can answer those. I do want to, I don't know if this is proper, but the person who called in earlier about the class size, and that's one of our policies, there's a procedure that's attached to this policy that's rewritten every year, Peter, is that correct? Where the leadership team decides best allocation of teachers, and they have a ratio that they follow. So, and it's in that report that comes out every year. So for that person who was commenting about that, she should check that procedure, which is under the policies on our board pack, or on our webpage. So, so class size is one of them. Conflict of interest, public participation, that's a new one for us. And pupil privacy rights and employee harassment. Most of these are following the VSBA's. Actually, all of them are following VSBA. The only one that's new for us to actually look at is public participation. So.
And so where it says adopt, we're just adopting.
We're adopting.
As is.
Or amending.
And the amend is the recommended amend.
Right.
Amend.
We're amending the newest version, basically.
Got it.
And generally, those amendments are coming from the VSBA.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I'll move that we adopt or amend policies A6, A21, B5, C8, and D6.
I'll second that.
Great. Questions, comments? For the
Yeah, when I was looking at these again, I had read them before, but I tried to read them again. I had just a question on public participation at the board, and when I'm looking at that, There's two areas. It's public comment on agenda items and public input on items not on the agenda. And is this all still at just the beginning of the meeting?
Yes, I had that same confusion where I went, oh my gosh, are we supposed to be having public comment after at every action item? And, oh, I wish Suzanne was here. Suzanne checked in, maybe you.
She did, she with the Vermont State School Board. And we also, as part of this, are putting a procedure together, which it would be that everything would be at the beginning of the meeting. And that you would, Peter was gonna write this up, but we're still in the process of it. But that you would kind of outline how the public comment period would be. Anybody who had a public comment would do it at the beginning.
Yep.
On any topic. It could be on an agenda item, or it could be just a comment.
Yep, okay. Yeah, when I read it again.
I know, I did the same thing. I went, oh my gosh, we haven't.
Well, I just want to clarify, and really, I think what we heard is that it's at the discretion of the chair. There are times where you may invite public comment for an agenda item. Just as an example, several years ago, there was, 100 people in the audience who were there to talk about the budget. That public comment period was at the discretion of the chair, saved till that budget presentation took place.
Okay, which makes sense. Having that flexibility, I think, is good.
Yeah.
But it also, this policy, which we haven't had, does limit this, okay? This is a board meeting to do business, not an open hearing on a subject or many subjects of which it could turn into, which is why this whole balance between how you respond to public comments during the meeting, or sort of incidentally maybe, but how that doesn't come up and how we can communicate back to the person who has made that comment that they were heard. They were heard. You may not agree, but they were heard, okay? So this, because we haven't had this, and obviously the state has, or the School Board Association has to help us, and it seems to me that this is an important thing with that discretion by the chair.
And
we will make it lowercase.
okay.
Yeah.
You say it was all examples.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
As far as the procedure goes, I'm hoping that when we put our final procedure together, that we incorporate what the Community and Engagement Committee had written in a draft form. And the last time it was looked at was about a year ago, and we would be adding in this piece, which is what you would do as the chair at school board meetings. But so hopefully we'll present this at some meeting, just the procedure, so that we can look at it. Okay.
Great. Any other questions or comments on any of the policies? Seeing none, all those in favor of passing the motion as stated, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Great.
Great.
Thank you for all your work.
Well, we've got about 10 more coming this way.
Good job. Bring it on. Bring it on.
It's all this easy.
All right, other. Is there any other?
Oh, did you want to say something about the fundraising?
Oh, I did. I sent out a thank you. There is a raffle at Mums. You should have seen if you read my email this afternoon. If anyone's interested in contributing, I'm happy to be the go-between. Otherwise, you can go on the Mums website and there's an opportunity to donate there. The drawing is, I believe, now Wednesday afternoon. So anyway, it looked like there are a lot of businesses in town that have donated great items, and I'm not sure it's gotten that much publicity, so that's why I brought it to your attention. Any other?
When I saw that, it made me think, where are we at with communications from the schools?
If you wish to receive all communication from all schools, tell Emily that you wish
Okay.
not to receive all communications from all schools, except the one that your child attends, tell Emily.
I did say I wanted
Either way, tell her.
communications, but it hasn't.
Because I remember you were only supposed to tell her which one or the other, but I now can't remember which one it was.
We have to honor
Yeah.
all or none.
I said, yes, I wanted all, but I haven't,
I forwarded that to Emily, she might not have.
Okay.
They
Maybe
might
she
not have
missed
asked
it,
you
because
yet.
I,
it was
Yeah,
right
I'm
before the
getting it.
holiday, but I just wanted to check.
Have you been
'cause-
added yet?
yeah,
You-
I've been good, yeah.
Okay, great.
Okay, so I'll follow up with Emily.
Yeah, I saw that, I was like, oh, yeah, anyway, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great, and you can get all the robocalls too if you want.
Oh, fantastic.
Can you get one and not the other?
Yeah.
Seriously, because it was,
No,
No.
no.
you're getting the
No.
calls.
You're in or you're out.
You're in or you're out,
Yeah.
for everything.
All in,
Difficult
we
to have all
tried
these
to
different
yeah,
lists.
sort that out.
Yeah.
Might be able to carve you off.
Okay, a motion to adjourn, or no, we just adjourned. No, we don't.
We need these together.
We're done with that.
Yeah, I'll make a motion that we adjourn.
Please, thank you.
I'll second it.
Second. Great. We are adjourned at 8:37.